Hello and welcome to Inside Coverage. I am Jori Epstein here with my fellow senior NFL reporter, Charles Robinson. I say fellow, but really he is the vet on the show. And we are here to talk all things quarterback, particularly starting with what Tua Tagovailoa went through on Thursday night. Remember, Inside Coverage is now available on its own feed, so subscribe to it, leave us a 5-star review. All of the good things help us get started, help us keep going and just really carrying on this show. So C-Rob, before we get into all of this, how are you? We haven't podcasted in a while, and just a little behind the scenes for our listeners. We always clap before the show, and C-Rob just very casually cracked his knuckles before the clap. So let's not pretend like that didn't happen. Explain.
Yeah, it just tells you how old I am, that when it sounds like firecrackers every time I go to crack my knuckles. You know what's funny about this? The last podcast I was on, Frank was the point guard. The podcast before that I was on, Fitz was the point guard. Now you're the point guard. I don't think they're ever going to give me the ball back again. I think that's it. I think they were like, you're done.
Well, I see it completely opposite, which is that we need you to not be the point guard because you have so much insight that our best move as a podcast is to tee you up and be like, C-Rob, tell us all those nuggets from that never-ending phone ring that you have.
Well, I wish I could have used it, obviously, last night with what happened, obviously, with Tua. Unfortunately, I've everybody's ghosting me at this point, but yeah, I mean, this is the topic of the day. I think that's something we're going to have to get to right away.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a little heads up for our listeners, we are going to this Friday and going forward on Inside Coverage talk about Charles's awesome new column, The QB Room. He kind of takes you inside really what's going on with so many quarterbacks around the league, the plays he liked, the plays he was concerned about, some sort of a bigger issue. He's got the film. I mean, we are very, very detailed in this column, but that really tees us up well with where we're going to start tonight, because after your column came out, we watched Thursday Night Football between the Buffalo Bills and the Miami Dolphins. And I mean, now Tua Tagovailoa's 3 interceptions feel like such a distant concern after a really scary moment. There were just under 5 minutes left in the third quarter. 4th and 4, the Dolphins are facing. Tua keeps it. He does get that first down, but he keeps going and kind of barrels his head right into Buffalo Bills safety Damar Hamlin's chest. And I think all of us, unfortunately, know from Tua's past history what it looks like when Tua has suffered a really serious injury. So Tua is horizontal on the ground. His right hand is balled up in a fist. The fencing response that is associated with traumatic brain injury. And shortly after he was ruled out with a concussion, he was able to walk off. But I mean, let's just start very broad. When you think, C-Rob, of Tua's career, of the multiple concussions he suffered in 2022, the retirement he said he considered after the season, I mean, what went through your mind when you saw that scary moment?
The wild thing is, consider that moment. It was a snapshot, that single play and that collision. To me, instantaneously, I'm like, this is a snapshot of how dangerous the NFL really is, because you have a defender whose heart stopped on the field, who is making the tackle. And then you have a quarterback who, as you said, in 2022, he had severe concussions, 2 severe concussions in the expanse of 4 days that nearly ended his career. And I'm like, just the fact that it's these 2 people running into each other in this moment. And then we see Tua on the ground again, as you said, the fencing posture. Yeah, I mean, it's frightening. It was frightening even when Tua took off. It's 4th down, and it's one of those plays where clearly it's instinctual. You're trying to make a play to continue this drive. There's some desperation at that point in sort of how he's playing. And just the whole head first nature of it, everything about it. The second he hit the ground, and you instantaneously see an offensive lineman go to a knee immediately right next to him, and you're like, this is we're going right back to that place in 2022, and we're questioning, is this guy going to get up? Is he going to get carted off? What does this mean for his career? Obviously the first thing you ask is he okay? But I just thought that it was Hamlin making the tackle, and that it's Tua that's on the turf. I'm like, this is such the 2 players on the field who probably for lack of a better term, like scared us the most the last couple of seasons in terms of health. It was Damar Hamlin collapsing, obviously, when his heart stopped against the Bengals, and then Tua when he suffered those severe concussions in 2022. So there's a lot of questions that we have to ask now, but it's going to be something that we're going to watch this unfold, and it's going to be really, I think, the doctors that guide where this goes.
No, I mean, I think in this like really awful way, you kind of like couldn't draw it up any more scary for the audience. I said the same thing I put in our Slack channel, like, why did this have to happen to Damar Hamlin? And you just feel for Damar that he'd worked through the PTSD of his heart stopping on the field. And also, he didn't do anything on that tackle. Like, this was not a dirty play. In fact, he barely even tackled him. Tua barreled his head into Damar's chest, but it's very scary. And I think when you look at 31-10, I mean, they lost the game, but you have to ask yourselves, how much more did the Miami Dolphins lose last night? And I think you talk about Tua Tagovailoa and what he has done since his 2022 concussions. We know that he practiced jiu-jitsu to work on falling, and then he gained weight last year to try and be more stable, but then lost some weight before this season to try and become a little more mobile. And so I just, when you look at what's happened to Tua Tagovailoa's body, before we get into what Mike McDaniel said, C-Rob, what would you tell Tua if he said, hey, C-Rob, what do you think I should do?
Well, circumstances have changed for him. He's on the other side of that $212 million contract extension, right? And right now, as it stands, there's $124 million in injury guarantees that are on the table there if doctors say you can't safely continue your football career. I would say to him, this is between you and your family. It's between you and God or whatever else guides you. Football should be the side issue right now. The rest of your life should be something that you should be thinking about. And I would probably say, give Andrew Luck a call. Talk to him about, he went through this process where his body was breaking down so badly, and he cut his career a decade short, maybe 15 years short, right? To walk away from football. And maybe ask Andrew Luck, when you went through this in your mind, how did you get to where you landed? And how do you feel now, having walked away from it? Certainly Andrew Luck, I have no doubt Andrew Luck misses football, but what does that, mean? I think he should reach out and talk to some individuals who have gone through some things health-wise and find out what the trade-off was like for these individuals. Now that every person, it's their own journey, and how Tua ultimately feels about it, I'm sure that's different for every single player. But financially, we're talking about an entirely different situation. Not that he couldn't have walked away financially before, but at this point, his future's secure, especially if the doctors tell him you cannot go back and play safely. And that's one thing I think people should understand here. There's some different ramifications here. If the doctors say to Tua, you're okay to return and play football, and Tua says, I'm hanging it up, he will forfeit the $124 million in injury guarantees. So basically, the doctor's advice really is, I think, going to have to guide what we talk about, financially, what's on the table and what isn't. And frankly, I think the leadership of the Dolphins, there's probably some inner reflection that has to happen there too. Like, if you're Mike McDaniel, do you not just sit there and go, like, am I going to do this? Am I going to be the steward of the ship? And this guy, ultimately, something happens to him where, is there going to be something that happens on a football field that dramatically alters this guy's life forever, or potentially ends it? Because we are talking about head injuries. How often can this happen? Right. And so I even think, in terms of the standpoint of the Miami Dolphins, the leadership there has to be some real inner dialogue about, when do we step up and go, we're not comfortable putting you out there and potentially altering the remainder of your life. You're a young man.
No, Sirab, I think you're so right, and it really was so emotional for Mike McDaniel. He was struggling to put sentences together after the game last night. We saw that picture that went viral of as Tua's walking off the field, and again, thankfully he was able to walk off the field on his own. Mike McDaniel kisses his head, and it's almost this like prayer of a kiss of like, please do not have this severe long-term damage. And then Mike McDaniel was asked after the game, is it safe for Tua to play football again? And he did not say yes. He did not say, I feel confident it is, and we just need to get through this. He said, look, I'm not an expert on that, and I'm not going to speak on that. And this was Thursday night, basically Friday morning by the time he was speaking. And he said, we will have Tua undergo significant evaluations tomorrow. And with that information, we will move forward. But until we have more evaluation information, I mean, I think you need to have Tua skip at least one more game, if not because of the doctors saying he can't clear concussion protocol, but there is a different level of risk each time you get another concussion. This is something that is cumulative in the way that it responds. And I mean, I think your advice is so great about going to talk to other quarterbacks. This is Tua's 5th year. Andrew Luck played 7 years. I even think of Troy Aikman, who obviously is still very involved in the game, but despite the fact that he played 12 years, he did leave on his own terms after, I think there was a Super Bowl he didn't even remember, a playoff game because of his concussion. Yeah.
Right? Steve Young had concussion issues.
We've seen this with a lot of quarterbacks, and I do think, like, I look at the picture of Tua Tagovailoa from when he signed that deal just a few weeks ago, and he has his beautiful 2 children sitting with him and his wife, and there are children in the mix. I mean, I think about Dak Prescott, the Cowboys quarterback, got his new deal this week, and he was talking on a podcast with his brother and saying, like, this is so different now that I have a daughter involved. And when I think about the generational wealth I'm giving her, and I mean, Dak and his brother grew up in a trailer home, and sometimes they couldn't even keep the lights on there. And now he's giving his daughter, as he called it, an alley-oop into life. And so I think it's so different what you're talking about, but also there's that real question of wanting to be there to experience life with them and making sure you're healthy enough to not only be there, but to remember it. And so go ahead.
Well, Jori, what's the threshold? Like, what? Like, seriously, if he comes back, to me, that is a question the Dolphins have to ask. Tua has to ask himself, like, how much longer are we going to do this? 1 more concussion? 3 more concussions? Oh, 1 concussion a season? Like, what the hell is the threshold? Because at some point you have to sit there and go, there is damage occurring here. You're knocked unconscious. This has happened multiple times. And as you said, there is the nature of it is they stack, and it's just a situation where I hate to say this, but like, think of Junior Seau, right? Think of, players whose lives ended in, they were living in such pain that they had to ultimately consider whether or not to take their own lives. Some players thought about it and didn't. Some players did. And so I think it's just like, how far are we going to take this? If you want to come back, I understand that. And as you said, he's 5 seasons in, a ton of football left inside him. I just don't know if there's much safe football left inside him. So at that point, you just have to say, where does this stop for me? How many, if this was any other ailment, right? Somebody's having heart attacks, right?
Right.
The 3rd heart attack, at that point, are you going to go, clearly what I'm doing here is leading into this. I have to make some changes that keep me safe. And what are some lifestyle and career thresholds where I need to start directing myself in a different way than I have before? And it's a difficult conversation for him to have. We're all going to opine on it. It's a very personal thing for himself. And that's what's got to unfold, I think.
Okay, and I think something that really stuck out to me is JJ Watt was on Twitter last night, and someone was saying, why didn't Tua just slide? And JJ made the great point of, when we're watching the broadcast, we see that yellow line. We see where that first down marker is. That yellow line is not actually on the field. That is TV made. And so I think that it kind of reminds us of the risk of these guys. One, when you think about how like amped up they are for the game, you can't really think that degree of like reasonable, but also they really don't know necessarily if they've gotten that first down. That said, I think you have to tell Tua, maybe you're not keeping it anymore. Like, Tua's a great passer. He gets the ball out really quickly. I understand that mobile quarterbacks had a different dynamic to the game. But if I'm the Dolphins, I'm again, we'll see what the doctors say. I don't want him playing for at least the next game because I just think there's too much risk and too much. I want to make sure he is playing with as clear of a head as possible by the time he gets back out there. And I am going to put restrictions on the way he's playing. Like, I know that you've seen guys who have tore their ACL or something else, and they're like, no, it's part of who I am. This is not a limb. This is your brain. You get one of them, and you can't repair it in the same way that you can repair a knee.
And the concussions have come in different ways, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's like he's been sacked and, thrown to the ground. There's a concussion. Now he's got a concussion running into someone. There's no obvious pattern where you can go, well, you're doing this one thing and it's causing it. No, you're playing football. You're slamming your body into other large bodies and at rates of speed. And so I think do you start wearing the guardian cap? Are you the first quarterback to wear the guardian cap every time out? What other ancillary measures are there to potentially protect him? Because he's taken other measures up until this point, and now we're back here again. And that's another thing. We're back in 2022 again. The next time he steps on the field, we're all going to be holding our breaths all over again. We're all going to be sitting there going, every single hit, oh God, oh God, oh God. And here's another thing too, like, what if you're a defender, right?
Yeah.
And what if, let's say, God forbid, you come off the edge free. You're uncovered. Someone blows it, right? And you got a shot on Tua. If I'm a defender, I don't know how in my mind I'm not thinking, man, I have to hit this guy a certain way because I do not want to end his career. Like, I don't want to hurt this guy in a way that it's going to haunt me the rest of my life. I really, truly believe that I'd be curious to hear some of these defensive players that are in the game right now. If you have a free shot on Tua, do you think it's going to enter your mind, hey, like, I don't want to be the guy who does this?
No, I think it's such a great question. And that's the problem here is that you can't play football scared. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for you. It doesn't work for your teammates, and it doesn't work for the defenders. The guardian cap is an interesting idea because if you are trying to create some degree of protection that allows him to not think about it, I think if you have the guardian cap and you have like Tua, you're not taking off. Sorry. Like, you can scramble outside the pocket if you want, but you are not taking it upfield because you just right now cannot be trusted to do that in a way that is safe for you and the team. I think those are some potential ways to do it. I think back to a story I wrote about a tight end, Grant Calcaterra, who's now playing for the Philadelphia Eagles, had 3 diagnosed concussions at Oklahoma and actually retired, went to be training, became an emergency medical trainer, was going to go be a firefighter, kind of get the thrill he got from football elsewhere. And then ultimately decided to come back and got a doctor's letter that it was safe for him to come back. He played at SMU and now he's been playing for the Eagles for a few years. And again, Grant is wonderful. His family's wonderful. I spent time with them writing the story, but he got another concussion last year. And I'm like, I don't like this. Like, it's not my choice, but I do not like that this happens again. And again, when we say someone like Grant 4 diagnosed concussions and someone like 2 or 3 diagnosed, I always qualify it as diagnosed because they are having way more concussions on the field than is diagnosed. I mean, by one definition, a concussion is when your brain hits your skull, and that's happening all the time in football plays. But I do think that you just really, if you're the Dolphins leadership, in my opinion, have a responsibility to save Tua from himself. And I'm not saying that means don't let him play, but it does mean consider in what ways you're letting him play.
Yeah, but again, it's not realistic to put guardrails in for a quarterback, right? Because you can say you're no longer allowed to run. Like, you can say that you're no longer allowed to run. Well, if you say that, it's going to get out, and then other teams are going to go, okay, well, defensively, we just might as well, we're in a situation now where we can scheme a certain way because we know Tua is now basically not allowed to run. There's a mandate in place, right? And like, you can't do that. You can't go out there and play free offensive football, with a wide open scheme. When a quarterback is told anytime you run, you're a danger to yourself, your health is at risk. So we have to remove this from the game. You're tying an arm behind your back as an offense. And oh, by the way, if he's not allowed to run, what's he allowed to do in the pocket? Can you scramble? How long are you allowed to hold it? Hey, Tua, you better start counting in your head. And if it gets to 3, you got to throw the ball away. Like you have to, if you start putting in all these guardrails schematically to try and protect him, it's no longer real football anymore. Then at that point, you're just doing some things that make it. That would be like taking a running back who, has had repeated knee injuries or concussions himself and saying, you know what, we're not running you between the tackles anymore. We're just going to run you on sweeps and reverses or this or that. You just can't do that. It's not feasible. So there's a lot of questions to be answered here. And again, we just keep going back to 2022. And it was funny because when the offseason came and he was signing that contract extension, and you go through these training camps, and I had a lot of conversations with like GMs and coaches about the quarterback deals because there were so many of them in the offseason. And we talked about the element of risk, right? And I remember 2 conversations in particular that really stuck out. One was, geez, Jordan Love's getting a lot of money on a short resume. And then the other one was, yeah, Tua had a healthy season. Right. Like that's great that he went through 2023 and didn't sustain a concussion, but we're not that far removed from when he himself was questioning whether or not retirement should be an option. And this is now we're on the other side of that risk and we see what's on the table. But now there are injury guarantees there. And so long as doctors say, make a decision here. And if they tell him, hey, if you go back out on the field, there's, here's the percentages and this is not a safe career for you anymore, given what has happened, then he's got $124 million, sitting there that was not there, obviously, prior to this.
Yeah, you've got to give credit to his agent, Ryan Williams, for getting that, because it's like on one hand you say, oh no, what are the Dolphins going to do from a franchise standpoint if Tua can't play? But this is why these players are holding out. I mean, we saw Jordan Love, who got injured last week in Brazil after getting that $55 million a year deal. And he had, I guess, held in at the beginning of training camp when I was there, and he and Tua got their deal done. I mean, they announced it right after one another. Let's say you can decide who got the deal done first, actually, and how they chose to announce it, given that they were represented by the same agency. But I do think this was something where Tua is getting the 53 plus, Jordan Love is getting the 55 plus. And when you see Jordan Love get hurt last week in Brazil, and again, that is a shorter term injury, and now with Tua's concussions, it kind of gives us a different lens into why these players do take these stances and do hold out and do try and fight for their money, because you really don't know when this game is going to be over. And I think when we get to the conversation of retirement and what happens on the other side of those injury guarantees, I'll just say, like, for our listeners who think we're soft, maybe I am. I probably am. That said, you have former players like Richard Sherman and Tony Gonzalez on the broadcast saying it's time for him to retire. You have Des Bryant saying, NFL, go ahead and do the right thing. He needs to retire. I mean, these are former players who played in very physical manners. Like, for a guy like Richard Sherman to say that, obviously it's way easier to talk about someone else's health and it's not impacting you. But I do not think that this is like some armchair person. Like, these are the players who are out there concerned about this.
Yeah, no, I mean, come on. That's not anybody at this point that says this is some element of toughness or, I mean, that's a bunch of bullshit. Like, let's be real here. Like, this is, you can't watch someone go into a fencing posture and there's nobody who's putting themselves on the field next to that player. I keep thinking about that offensive lineman who immediately dropped to a knee right next to Tua. Like, what is going through your mind, right? Like that leaves a scar, there's something in your head as a teammate that is scary. So it's not about being tough, going out there and risking, another concussion and maybe brain damage and maybe, you're somebody.
I don't even think it's a maybe brain damage. I think there is brain damage. The question is just how much and what the effects are going to be from it at this point.
Yeah. I don't even listen to that stuff now. And I don't even think that's really part of the culture. Realistically, I don't think there's any NFL player out there right now who is worth their salt and who anybody cares about in terms of their opinion, who would say, oh, well, if he just walks, that's soft. No, that's ridiculous. No one feels that's a mentality that I think has been long removed from the game for the better. People get it. And so, enough of that. One thing I do want to say about the way he was playing, by the way, this morning I started to go through that game again. And I will say this, his worst pick that he threw toward Robbie Anderson, the receiver went the wrong way on the play. I don't know if Robbie thought it was an in-breaking route, but it clearly was not an in-breaking route, clearly was an out-breaking route. And so even some of the elements of his play prior to that concussion, people are like, oh, Tua just, what a terrible game. He's so awful this game, all these different things. Now, one, the interception that he floated up was clearly
you got to get that out of bounds.
Yeah. I mean, that's clearly problematic. But I feel like we knew what he was trying to do there. He just couldn't.
Right.
He couldn't get the arm under it to fully get it out of bounds. But it's not like, I don't think he was playing as badly last night in totality as maybe people thought. And again, I don't want to be callous here, but approaching it from a football perspective, I do question the Dolphins have so much on the line here. And I didn't feel like they really addressed the backup quarterback spot where in a way that's meaningful, where you're like, hey, look, we do have a guy who's had obviously concussions in the past. We could potentially lose him for a long spate of time. Let's make sure we have an experienced veteran quarterback in place who's had some success maybe as a starter in this league, a la like a Sam Darnold, that type of player, ready to roll. Because I think if Tua is out for a sustained period of time here, the Dolphins are in some serious trouble.
Right. I definitely think a guy like Ryan Tannehill, who's not currently with the team, is the type of person that the Dolphins should consider, because even if Tua is able to come back in, let's say, 2-3 weeks, you can't feel confident and feel safe knowing that he is going to be your quarterback every game for the rest of the season. And yes, on the football note, again, obviously can't compare it to the real human elements of this. So Tua has 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions, as you mentioned. Receiver going the wrong way on 1. I think it went through the receiver's hand on a 2nd. He's trying to throw it out of bounds on the 3rd. On the other side of the ball, when you talk about getting the ball where you want it to go, I mean, Josh Allen, as usual, just had some insane arm angles. One, he's running toward the right sideline and kind of heaves it back left. And I'm like, how did that get where it's supposed to go? I think when you look at his stat line of 139 yards and a touchdown, it's just so not representative of the way that he played that game, even though the touchdowns were ultimately scored by the running backs. But when you look at this, Bills have now beat the Dolphins 12 of their last 13 games. What did the Bills, and particularly that offense, do that was so impressive to you on Thursday
They have a
night?
running game. Jori, they have a legitimate James Cook. They have a legitimate, powerful running game, where they can go heavy personnel. They can go, they could go 22. You got the 2 tight ends you can roll out there. So there is some versatility there. Clearly, it's a collective when you look at the receivers. Moving on from Stephon Diggs, we ended up talking this whole offseason about, well, what are they going to do now? The receivers look weak and they're thin, and your number 1, your number 2 in Diggs and Gabe Davis have moved on, and you're replacing them. And Keon Coleman's a rookie who, physically looks amazing, but didn't get a ton of separation in college. Is he going to be able to step in right away and contribute as an X receiver? And I think in all that, what I clearly ignored in the offseason, because I had those questions in my mind, was what if legitimately they really do have a high level running game? What if we're going to see James Cook turn a corner and be a top 5 running back in the NFL? How does that change the pressure on Josh Allen? Now week 1, he was playing the type of hero ball, running the jumping to score the touchdown in the end zone, all those things. That was the, okay, that's fun to watch, but here we go again. Is this how this is going to be this season? And then week 2, they roll out a running game that makes me feel a heck of a lot better about what they're bringing to the table. I think Von Miller looking like the Von Miller, who is a very productive player, is a huge boost for that defense. I picked them when we made our picks in the preseason, which, by the way, I hate making those picks. I don't know, you and I don't know if we've talked about it. I hate making these picks.
Okay, it's better now because at my last job, I had to pick game and score for every game every week. And I was literally just anyone else can do this for me. This is my least favorite part. Your girl picked Joe Burrow for MVP and the Patriots for the first overall draft pick. And then the Patriots went out and beat the Bengals last week. So calm down. I'm the one who needs to be struggling over here.
I picked the Bills for biggest disappointment. I think when I made that pick, I didn't know in my mind, how are they going to be able to resolve this with the skill position pieces, particularly the wide receivers? Is this just going to be a tight end dominated offense? It felt like defensively, I didn't know that Von Miller had anything left in the tank. And so I'm sitting there going, yeah, this is totally feasible that we have these high expectations for the Bills. We've seen them not be able to break through the wall. Now they've made these wholesale changes with some of the talent on their team, and I could have seen them taking a big step back. Never at any point did I think, well, what if they have a running game? Like, what if this is the balance is brought by an aspect of the game that they started to lean on more last year down the stretch? What if that's the big change that really creates balance for the Bills? So great start for them. Hate to do those stupid preseason picks. Probably will get a call after this from the people.
Okay, but it's their run game and it's also their defense, even without Matt Milano, who tore his biceps in the preseason. I mean, I'm really impressed. And I'll say Patrick Mahomes, right after Tua got hurt, tweeted out the prayer emojis, which one, really classy move by Patrick, but also shows me, hey, Mahomes is watching this game. So I'm curious, when you think about what the Bills did last night, how much is your confidence growing, if at all, about what the Bills can ultimately do against the Chiefs in January? Because I was at that game this past year when the field goal didn't go in, and the Bills locker room was pretty devastating. It's kind of one of those things where they're a really, really good team year after year, but they struggle to get over the hump against Patrick Mahomes. Like, how do you feel now versus 8 months ago when you think about no Diggs, no Milano, but the running game and defense kind of figuring things out? How much more confident or less confident are you about their ability to play?
We're 2 weeks into the season, so there's still injuries, obviously, that can happen, that can change things. I have always been a proponent on this show, going all the way back to when Terez and I, started the podcast, that I believe high-powered teams like the Chiefs, the Bills, they have to have a running game. They have to have the ability to impose themselves once you get to the playoffs. Even if you don't need to reach for that club, the club's got to be in the bag. And I think now the Bills have it. So it's at least right now in the early going. I don't want to, I keep telling myself, like, don't get over your skis, until mid-October. Like, give it 4 games, and then maybe you feel like you really do have a sense at what these teams can or can't do. But, And frankly, look, defensively, the Chiefs and like Miami, ton of talent on Miami's defense. And I don't want this to seem like a huge dig at all, but
they were missing Christian Wilkins last night, though.
Right. Yeah. And remember, that's the tandem, some of the moves that get made in the offseason in the middle of that defense, especially up front, was going to be the strength of it. And, so I believe that there's a lot of talent there. I just would not equate necessarily, especially when Wilkins isn't on the field, Kansas City's defense with Miami's defense. I think Miami's, particularly with Steve Spagnuolo, they have an ability. I feel like they step up and they get stronger as the season goes on. And
yeah,
so we're still early, but a lot to like from the Bills early on.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll take a break in a second, but I just want to note that while we were recording this, Mike McDaniel did have a Zoom call with reporters and told them he doesn't see how Tua would play next game, but really the decision is going to be coming from doctors, not coaches. And he said he told Tua, just focus on being a dad this weekend, not on being a quarterback. Mike McDaniel also said that he doesn't really think you can ask Tua to think about his long-term future. He thinks that that's really not where they're at. I think there are different opinions there, but that's the latest we have out of Miami. So we'll take a quick break for some ads, and when we'll come back and we'll talk all about C-Rob's awesome new column, what it means for quarterbacks around the league, and how they should probably all be on watch, because C-Rob is going to be on them for good and for bad. All right, getting back into it, I'm so excited to be in the room where it happened. That is the room of the quarterback room, C-Rob's column. I love this column. I've been reading it when you did your NFC questions, your AFC questions. Now we had week 1 of your quarterback room. Before we get into the content here, C-Rob, take us through how you decided to do this column and also what we can expect through this season. Because I didn't realize this was coming before the first edition. And I'm like, heck yeah, this is like appointment reading.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I knew I wanted to have a staple column that would run every single week and probably somewhat in the off season as well. And I love writing about quarterbacks. It's a quarterback league. We say that so cliche, but it truly is. And to me, it's not just starters that are interesting now. It's the backups. It's the coaches that are attached to the quarterbacks. And it's wild. When I started to sort of think about it, I thought to myself, well, let me go out and see what kind of data, is available, or as Charles McDonald would say, the good stats. Let me see what good stats are out there on quarterbacks. And it's insane. The well of information on quarterbacks now is absolutely nuts. And one of the things that, and I'm going to address this in a future column, I was talking to a GM on the camp tour, and this is really sort of where the quarterback room started to snowball, and I really decided I wanted to do it. So I'm talking to a general manager, and we're talking about, when do you start rookie quarterbacks and all these things. And he said to me, I think I might have brought this up on a previous podcast. He said, like, he really wants to know. He would love to pick Andy Reid's brain about how he kept Mahomes off the field his entire rookie season.
Yes, I talked to so many people about that.
Yeah, and obviously, like, if you're winning, they're playing winning football. Like Alex Smith was playing at a high level. There's a lot of things that go into it. But as this GM said to me, he's like, it's still a Ferrari. Like, it's still a Ferrari in the garage. How do you
That's
not?
A great quote.
Yeah, like, how do you like not want to take the Ferrari out? And I was like, yeah, that would be a great, that's just one of these things where when you hear people in the league who want to pick the brains of other people in the league, and it's a question with young quarterbacks that teams approach every single year, and there's different, ideologies about it. And then there was another conversation I had. So that was part of why I was like, this would be great to do just a staple weekly piece on nothing but different avenues of quarterbacks, different things we're seeing, different things we're hearing. And then I had another conversation with another GM, and he brought up, we were talking about the selection process. Like, how do you hone in on who you think, is worthy of drafting, or where you put them on your board? And he said, well, there's the Bill Parcells rules of selecting a quarterback. And I was like, I don't know what the hell that is. I was like, I've been covering the league for 20 years.
I thought this was going to be one of those things that you knew and I didn't, because I just showed up a few years ago.
No, I've been covering the league 20 plus years. Why is that not something I already know in my head? Is Bill Parcells rules for? So I went, of course I go and I look it up, and I'm like, oh, this is a thing. Like, this is a really big thing that's been out there for a while. And as I started to read through Bill Parcells' rules, and I don't want to get into it now because I want to write about this in the future, but it was fascinating because I'm like, I don't know how many people really,
because I'll be reading that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm like, I don't even know how many people really fit these rules anymore. Like, I don't think you. And then I thought to myself, like, what other rules are out there? What other approaches are out there? There probably are approaches, because Bill Walsh had a certain set of criteria and so it's all these. I guarantee you, if you go to Sean McVay, you go, hey, if you thought in your mind, if you created a set of rules for yourself, what are those set of rules? I guarantee you Sean McVay can give you, he could probably rattle off 10 things he really wants to see. Just like Kyle Shanahan, just like Andy Reid, just like Sean Payton. When I went through Broncos camp, I mean, Sean Payton, the data he had, I was like, stop. Like, okay, man. Like, he's like rattling off every single thing as he's going through Bo Nix. And, so to me, I was just like, this is great. Like, this is an endless, like, it's a bottomless well of information now. And, Ian O'Connor writes the Aaron Rodgers book, right? And I'm like, that,
I'm reading that right now.
Yeah, I haven't gotten into it yet. I'm really excited to read it. But I'm like, I'm sure there's probably things in that book that could end up in the quarterback room column. And I love focusing on quarterbacks. I love talking about quarterbacks. I think everybody in the league does. And things are constantly developing every year that are new storylines, new avenues. The Atlanta Falcons going, yeah, we're going to go ahead and take Michael Penix and sit him for a couple of years, maybe. So that's really where it came from. I'm super excited about it. It is the first time, I think, since early in my years at Yahoo, and we're talking a long time ago, where I used to do it like a notes column really early on. And I would spend days and days and days compiling things for that column. I haven't done that in a long time, and I've kind of craved it. And so this is sort of scratching that itch.
This is awesome. And I've talked to a lot of coaches and general managers on my training camp tour, just trying to understand, how do you know when a quarterback's ready to start? Because I'll have a story coming on that. And sometimes the answers were awesome. And other times I'd be frustrated because they'd be like, well, when they have command of the offense. And I'm like, great, what does that mean? What does that look like? Give me an example. And then sometimes you did get examples like LaFleur being like, well, when we played the Steelers and Jordan Love made this pass, I felt more comfortable calling the game less conservatively. But I think you make a good point, is that there are some things that are like very mental. I know that Rams general manager Les Snead loves to talk about the video game, and that when guys go from the college to the NFL level, they're playing the next level of the video game. And so when you're analyzing a quarterback coming out of the draft, you really are saying, hey, I see you at level 2 of the video game. Well, I need to project how you're going to do at level 3 and 4 and 5, because the speed is going to be faster. The windows are going to be tighter. Defensive coordinators are going to be smarter, or at least more capable of shutting you down. What's it going to look like? But I think you make such a good point on the stats also of, I've been using NFL Pro, the league's new next gen tool lately. And it's just insane the amount of data there and how accessible and understandable it is. Like, I've got it pulled up right now. And sometimes I'll be like, oh, great, he completed X number percentage of his passes and touchdowns and interceptions. But when I try and understand what these coaches and general managers mean about command, about accuracy, well, this is telling me, is it short, intermediate, or deep? Is it passing with pressure or without? Yeah. How quickly are they throwing the ball? Was there a blitz? Where was the receiver? The rushing yards over expectation type stats where you really are able to kind of solve for it. And these stats are only going to become more valuable over the course of the season when we have a deeper sample size.
And Jori, that's not even the
tip of the iceberg.
Is he a dick? That's not even you're getting into all the football stuff of it, but that doesn't even get into the mental aspect of it. Can he be a leader? How does he treat teammates? Is he around in the off season? Is he just going to disappear on us? When he speaks about the organization, what is he going to say? There's just the amount of things that go. To me, what underscored it, and we've talked about this on the show, when I started covering the NFL, the Lions beat back in 2000 and then 2001, I remember asking Marty Morton, they had drafted Joey Harrington. Actually, it might have been 2002, whenever. It was after they had selected Joey Harrington with the 3rd pick in the draft. And I had asked him, how do you know? How do you know he's ready? How do you know he's the guy? All these things. And I remember Morningway gave me the anecdote was so weird. He was it was just a completely bizarre, he cobbled together these things. And I'm just God, this does not feel scientific to me. Flash forward to 2023, and you and I have talked about this. I asked Kyle Shanahan the same question.
Right.
And Kyle gives me this answer, and then he's but you just don't know until they get on the field. I'm you gotta be kidding me. All this stuff goes into this, and you still have no idea until this guy walks out on a field in a game that it actually counts. That's when you actually find out. So you can put in all this time and effort and spend
your career's on the line.
Everything. And you're still white knuckling it when the quarterback steps on the field in a game that counts for the first time. And you have to see, okay, was I completely fooled, or is this actually a real thing? And I thought, God, I just remember coming out of that room and being man, it's been 22, 23 years and I still don't know the answer to this. And I've asked, Marty Mornhinweg, who's not exactly held in high esteem, particularly in his short stint as head coach. And I asked Kyle Shanahan, who's held in very high regard. And I don't feel like I'm getting the science that is, and I was just it just isn't. It's not. There's no provable way to know in any way, shape, or form unless it's Peyton Manning happens, and you're okay, maybe once every 20 or 30 years, you're okay, that one person was built to do this. Their dad's a quarterback. Their brother's a quarterback.
Right. No, I read in the Aaron Rodgers book last night, he's sitting in the green room where I am in the book. And it was during the draft process, people are we like your arrogance. That's going to be confidence. And they're actually, you're a little too arrogant for us. And thus we're not going to draft you with the first 20 picks. And this is happening back in 2005. And just hours earlier from reading this, I had a conversation with someone who works very closely with quarterbacks in the league. Let's just leave it at that. Who's complaining to me that all quarterbacks are arrogant. And I'm I think they're all confident. I think some of them are arrogant. I think there is a difference of like, do you believe in yourself or do you also treat people condescendingly because of that? But it's definitely something that results. So we're not going to get fully into your column this week, but I do want to just touch really quickly. You have a stock up, stock down element, which I love, where you really talk about the quarterbacks who impressed you and maybe exceeded your expectations and the one who beneath. So take us through one of your stock up to start.
Yeah, we'll do three. I'm going to do three of those every week. So it's just basically, you look at the landscape and you go, definitively, I know these three guys. Their stock and trade, what they brought to the field on this particular Sunday or whatever day of the week it was, has changed in my mind where they're kind of evaluated. For me, Baker Mayfield. Now I know, look, it's the Washington Commanders defense. You could definitely question the level of competition. However, I felt like watching Baker Mayfield make some of the throws that he did, a couple of the balls that he threw to Mike Evans were just so next level that in my mind, Baker has always been up and down, right? His whole career. He's, upward trajectory, next year, downward trajectory, upward trajectory, downward trajectory. It's why he's not in Cleveland, because I think they felt like, look, this roller coaster, we can't keep doing this. And we can't give a guy a contract extension when he can't put together back-to-back years that show us there is a level of consistency here to bet on. So last year, I thought going into Tampa, I told people, I think he's done. I think Baker Mayfield's cashed. I think his career's over. This will be his last year as a starter. I looked like a complete fool, total idiot. Looked fantastic.
First time ever.
Yeah, surely. It's second by second in my life. He looks amazing. And I'm like, okay, but let's see, come on. Do we know this is real, or is 2024 when, we do the Scooby-Doo and we pull the mask off and it's the Baker Mayfield who stinks. And so the first game out, I'm like, it'll be week to week. And again, I'm not going to get over.
I didn't have Scooby-Doo on my bingo card for the podcast today.
But watch that game. Watch the ball placement. Watch the confidence he had at times in his receivers and Mike Evans. The body language. Like, to me, I'm like, oh, he had a great season. He had a great offseason. And this is now a guy who I think has rediscovered that level of confidence in him, and his willingness to take chances in the right spots with the right personnel. KYP, know your personnel. He knows his personnel now, and he knows who he can take chances with. And he threw some beautiful balls. I can't take anything away from him. I was like, absolutely stock up. No question in my mind.
Wait, I think it's easy to knock on him that he's going against the Commanders. They're a new team. They're figuring it out. Well, Baker also has a new offensive coordinator this year. His coordinator left to become a head coach.
Dave Canales,
I think the other really stark contrast is that Baker Mayfield was drafted first overall by the Cleveland Browns. And when you look at what Deshaun Watson was doing in Cleveland this week, it was in really stark contrast to what Baker was doing. But what I love about week one is we start to get these data points and we're like, should we believe this? And then week two kind of helps us figure it out. And we will not have to wait long to get a real understanding of what Baker does, because they've got a playoff rematch from just a few months ago against the Lions this week in Detroit. I'm super excited for that game. And I think that, to me, Baker Mayfield's stock up does not mean that he needs to have 289 yards and 4 touchdowns again this week, because the Lions have a better defense than the Commanders. But if he can continue to play in the way that he did, even if the production is different, that to me is going to be very impressive for Baker Mayfield.
Compete, right? I mean, just if he goes out and he competes the way that he has shown historically he has been able to do in the past, and keep his confidence up.
Competing is never something you have to worry about with that guy.
Yeah, but I mean, there are times though where it becomes negative, right? Where you're like, you start to see him go into a hole, and you're like, you need to pull it back a little bit here, and he just doesn't have the ability to do that. Well, now, is he a veteran? Has he gotten sort of into his veteran years now, and he's starting to understand, or now fully understand, some of the nuances and the little things, and when's the right time to try this throw? There's just a lot that goes into it. So if he really has hit a level of maturity, we're going to see it, continued into week 2 against Detroit.
And how about a stock down? Who are you expecting to look a little bit better in week 1, C-Rob? And they just didn't really show it.
got to be Will Levis, right? I mean,
you gotta be careful. You and your Tennessee radio hits. You're gonna have people coming after you for this.
Right. And I spent the whole offseason, I'm like, I don't understand. Like, people are so down on Will Levis, and they're like, they love Anthony Richardson so much. And when you look at the body of work and go and watch the Miami game last year that Will Levis played, watch him not have a great game, but at the end when it was really needed, make big throws and pull off an upset. And so I looked at Will Levis and I'm like, he's not just, you keep hearing this, he's just a robot. Like, he's just a robot out there. He's choosing whatever his command functions tell him where he's supposed to go with certain balls or whatever. And then occasionally there's like a system error and he does something completely foolish. I watched him, he throws a touchdown pass to Chig Okonkwo in the end zone. I thought he got lucky on that one. It was a 50-50 ball. I think Chig kind of bailed him out a little bit. But it was the interception, the pick six, late in the game when he's in this spot. He's got to move the football. He's got to make something. He's to, move the sticks and all those cliches. And what does he do? He gets into trouble and throws the most god-awful shovel pass into an area of the field where you're like, there's nothing but badness waiting for you, bro. And his instantaneous reaction on his knees when he saw it and he let it go, he grabbed his helmet. And it was just the, oh my God, what did I just do? Kind of, and I'm like, wow, every single person who's feeling that emotion right now, it just all got channeled through him because clearly he understands he just did something you absolutely cannot do. I'm curious to see week 1 to week 2, they play the New York Jets, and Aaron Rodgers has something to prove this week, I think, too. The Jets are going into Tennessee. Can he rebound? It's a much better defense, frankly, that he's playing this week. He could have a horrific outing against that Jets defense. And again, it's one of those games where I think
Will Levis is paying Hassan Reddick to not show up this week.
Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, it's just, it could go very wrong very fast for him. And it's already, I think, a little rough in Nashville. I think that when the talk radio scene right now is very much like, does this guy stink and who should we be blaming for him being our starting quarterback right now? It's already descending into that. So he needs to, and maybe the Jets are a good, go out and prove it and show that you can rebound from one week to the next against a team that has a considerable amount of defensive talent.
It's so funny you say that about radio. I'm doing Seattle radio this season, and I said something about them having an inopportune start last week, and the radio hosts were like, well, that's one way to put it. I was like, I didn't say this was opportune. I said inopportune. Anywho, why don't we take a real quick break? We'll come back, get a couple more odds and ends from the quarterbacks, and then we'll be off to week 2 of the football season. All right, welcoming us back in. Let's just hit on 2 more quarterbacks, understanding what they did in week 1 and what all of us can expect from them in week 2. So first, I want to talk about Justin Fields, Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, look, the Steelers went into Atlanta. They got that win. It was kind of a game-time decision. Russell Wilson tested his calf. It was not ready. He had re-aggravated a training camp injury. And now it looks like Justin Fields is going to start again in Denver, which, by the way, that is a big one for Russell Wilson because he's going back to Sean Payton and the Broncos, who he did not leave on great terms with. I think it was really interesting. I was not expecting Mike Tomlin to say on Tuesday, we're preparing as if Justin will start, but that is what he did. So, C-Rob, when you look at what Justin did, and I know you had some of his passing charts in your column this week, take us through what he did against the Falcons, and based on that, what do you expect from him against the Broncos, assuming he starts?
Yeah, it was interesting because when you looked at, it's in a piece of the columns called like a tale of 2 passing charts, and it looked at his passing dot chart versus Jalen Hurts passing dot chart and how Justin did not throw in the middle of the field at all. Like, you looked at it and there was a lot of talk about it on Twitter.
It's an insane chart.
Yeah, it really is an insane. I mean, it's a complete abyss of emptiness in the middle of, it might as well be the Indian Ocean in the middle of, or the Pacific Ocean in the middle of his chart. It's insane. Like, which,
by the way, Steelers offensive coordinator Arthur Smith ended up telling reporters that was intentional based off the safeties on the Falcons side, but you can decide whether or not you believe him.
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's 2 all-pro, and that's what I ended up writing is I'm like, look, all these people are arguing about, well, Justin Fields can't throw in the middle of the field. I'm like, no, when you look at it, when you look at that dot chart, there's no way on earth that this was not by design. There's no way that Arthur Smith did not look at Justin Fields and go, okay, we're trying to get him to the point now as a passer. We're weaning him along. Let's not send him into the teeth of two 2023 All-Pro safeties and Jesse Bates and Justin Simmons. Let's go ahead and not do that. Let's not turn the ball over. Let's not invite disaster. So instead, they worked the edges. They worked, outside the numbers, and both short and intermediate. Took an occasional shot deep, but everything was to the outside, shaded away from the safeties, or in places where they knew the safeties aren't going to be head hunting. Smith came out, Thursday? I think it was a couple of days after the column ran and said he obviously it's not like he's reading the column.
So that thing that C-Rob said in his column,
that was the thing.
Why don't we put that on the record?
Right. But I mean,
Yahoo Sports quarterback room.
I noticed it when he said it, and I'm like, I told y'all, like, this was clearly the plan. But
we got receipts. We have the published date.
The thing about his game, though, that was encouraging to me was I felt like it was pretty balanced. He didn't run crazy. It wasn't like he took off running like wildly. Like there were elements of it that there was good balance. I thought as a passer, he was as efficient in terms of, particularly given the expectations of what they put in the scheme for him that week. I thought he was as efficient as he could be. But when you watch the game, he improves over the course of the game. He gets stronger when you're watching him, and you're thinking, okay, I've seen everything to get a week 2 start now out of Justin Fields. I saw him get better over the course of game 1. He didn't turn the ball over, which is the huge bugaboo with Mike Tomlin. The second he turns the ball over, Mike Tomlin's like, yeah, let's pull the plug. Like we're not going to do this. Like, we're not going to have fumbles. We're not going to have interceptions. So why would you go away, at this point from progress? They made progress with him. And I told people when I did the AFC quarterback questions, I was like, yeah, they picked Russ, but don't just think this is over. Like, this isn't just over, because there are people in that building who really, truly believe in Justin Fields. And, Russ will keep the job. If Russ starts and wins, he'll keep the job. But let Fields get in there and show some progress and point toward that ceiling. And then, the team's going to go, let's look at the ages of these two players.
Yeah.
That's how this snowballs for Justin Fields. So I think I'm glad they're giving him a week 2 start, frankly, because I think he earned it in his play.
Well, and I think it's really interesting because you and I both went through the Steelers during training camp, and I believe as you who wrote, they believe they have their quarterback of 2025 on their roster. And so I think when you look at this, it could be that Justin gets a couple more games experience, a couple games to try things out with the staff, and then Russell starts the rest of the year, but then they roll with Justin next year. And so this is going to be important data, not only for the short term, but also for the medium and long term. I think it'll be really interesting. And I think also, I definitely remember as the season gets going that we expect things to look great or terrible all the time for quarterbacks based off what we expect. The reality of the NFL is almost nobody is clicking on all cylinders at all time, and almost nobody is never clicking on cylinders. Carolina Panthers are trying to test that theory, but that is another story. But I do think that trying to figure out what is the winning formula for this specific week, the Steelers figured that out. It's not necessarily what Justin Fields wanted, but they did figure it out. All right, one more quarterback. We talked about the quarterback who just left Chicago and Justin Fields, but how about the quarterback who just arrived? When you look at what Caleb Williams did in week 1, how did it compare to what you expected? I mean, even we just saw another first-round quarterback there not so long ago. How did this compare to that?
Well, okay, I think, I don't want to, it's not like, there's no alarm. Like, if anybody who's really alarmed by Caleb's, I'll read off the stat line. 14 for 29, 93 yards, took 2 sacks. Not the best game out of the box that really what you were expecting from Caleb Williams. He rushed 5 times for 15 yards, so that wasn't really a component of his game either. He didn't, I think realistically throughout that game, so much of it, they were leaning on the defense anyway, number one. I am not remotely worried about Caleb Williams' start. I mean, there's probably, when you look at Jaden Daniels, and again, the Commanders lost by a lot, to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I definitely looked at Jaden Daniels and said, oh yeah, this is the stuff I saw at LSU. Like, this is what this guy was doing at LSU. He's taking off, making plays. You could just see that sort of the play style where you're like, yeah, that's right. That's why the guy won the Heisman. Oh, and by the way, he's diving forward. Like when he's running the football, you got to stop doing that. Even though people on Twitter seem to disagree with me, they're like, it's just fine. He doesn't have to slide. I'm like, all right, man, go ahead, go off. But with Caleb, I think he had the luxury of the defense being what it is. I think the one thing that happened during the game and that I pointed out, he does this. There's a moment where protection breaks down instantaneously and he's going to do this out of structure thing. And we've seen it a million times in college with him, right? And typically what we would see is he's running around, makes a huge play downfield, right? Like does something ridiculous. No. Instead, this time he does a 360-degree spin. Oh, there's another defender. He does another 360-degree spin, and it's a 19-yard sack. And you're like, this is the NFL. Like, this is how you find out, oh, I can't do that shit. I can't do that stuff that I was doing in college where I'm extending plays against, some mid-Division I school where there's very little NFL talent, and then make some ridiculous 80-yard play down the field. That's not going to happen with regularity. Will it happen on the NFL level at times? Yeah, it's not going to happen with regularity.
I was going to say, we need the caveat because when I went through Bears training camp, they did say not only did they like Caleb Williams' ability to make plays out of structure, but a key reason why they drafted Rome Odunze 9th overall is because he's been on so many of those plays on the other side. And he, during college with Michael Penix, was able to kind of understand the scramble rules, understand the instincts. And so they're definitely expecting plenty of out of structure plays from that duo. But like you said, the regularity is not going to be the same at the NFL level and not going to be the same at the beginning. But I think back to the column you wrote this week on Tom Brady. And look, when Tom Brady's broadcasting right now and he's not starting off with this crazy good review, maybe that's better. Maybe you can kind of improve over ways. And it's better to get better than to get worse. With Caleb Williams, in some ways, I would almost feel sorry for him and for the Bears if he had this insane first outing, because it would create an unrealistic expectation that is what this tenure is going to look like. It's not going to look like that at all times, but they are going to figure it out. It's his first game in the NFL, and I think that there's plenty ahead for the Bears. But I'm excited to see what Caleb can do in week 2. I'm excited to see what Justin Fields can do in week 2. And I think we've got a lot of action this week. So I just want to thank our producers. We got Emmy on with us today, Stone behind the scenes. I'm at Jori Epstein on Twitter. C-Rob is at Charles Robinson. And Inside Coverage will be back on Sunday. Our colleagues Frank Schwab and Jason Fitz will be back to recap everything that happened. We'll both be back on next week. So subscribe, review, all of the things. Show us some love, Twitter, and everything. And thanks for listening. We'll be back soon.